Hey, okay, so this is going to be our first video that we're going to be discussing actual class content. Okay, so quick background. I will be posting the notes for this that I'm following along so that you can follow along and that you can use to study for your short quiz that's going to be after the video. This is probably going to be broken up into two sections because I don't want it to be too long. I don't want to like fry your brains. So anyway, here we go. So let's go ahead and pick up. Over the past couple weeks in class, before we got out for spring break and before we were all like quarantined, we were discussing people achieving their own freedom and equality and democracy in the midst of British imperialism and all kinds of things. That led us to discuss India, led by Gandhi, South Africa, Nelson Mandela. Right? We're kind of moving away from that. We're not going to talk so much about the British Empire and all that jazz. We're going to fast forward. So we left off, with India, that the whole thing there was in 1949. That's whenever they achieved their independence. South Africa achieved independence, but then they struggled with apartheid, and then that all ended in the 1990s. So that's kind of where we're going to be around, the 1980s and 90s. But instead of in Africa, we're going to move north, and we're going to be in Russia. Specifically, the Soviet Union. We're going to talk about the collapse of the Soviet Union, how it all fell apart. You did not grow up with the Soviet Union, neither did I. We need to talk about what happened, why it just doesn't work anymore, how that fell apart. Okay, so the Politburo is the main group in the Soviet system. They're kind of like the leaders of the Communist Party. They run the show. They push everything forward. The leaders of the Politburo were really old dudes by the time you get to the 1980s, and they just were really out of touch with the people of the Soviet Union. They really weren't concerned with a whole lot of the problems that people were facing, and not only that, there were major economic problems plaguing the Soviet Union. There was a massive drop in the standard of living. People just did not have a ton of money for food. Life was pretty just tough. Life was just tough for the average person living in the USSR. Anyway, that's the backdrop, okay? In 1985, the leader of the Soviet Union died. I don't care if you know his name. You don't need to know his name. Well, I mean, I guess if you want to be an expert in Russian history. But anyway, Mikhail Gorbachev was elected to be the head of the Politburo, which makes him the head of the Communist Party, and it makes him the head of the Soviet Union. He is basically their president or whatever. He's in the same position that Joseph Stalin was in, and then Nikita Khrushchev was in. All of the leaders of the Soviet Union. This is the guy now, Gorbachev. Mikhail Gorbachev realized that Russia was struggling, that the Soviet Union was struggling, that they needed more than just the average day-to-day thing, because if they kept going the direction that they were going, it was going to come unraveled. People were going to start violently protesting, revolution kind of stuff. And he wanted to prevent that at all costs. He was a hardcore communist. He wasn't, interested in free markets. He wasn't interested in, being best buddies with the West, like the United States. He wasn't interested in that. He did want to decrease tensions, but he was not super interested in transforming the Soviet Union into the United States. A lot of people have suggested that about him, and it's not entirely true. Anyway, his two reforms. One is called glasnost. Two is perestroika. Glasnost is a Russian word that means transparency. Perestroika means restructuring or reforming. We're going to talk about each of those in turn. Glasnost, transparency. This is the whole idea is that the Russians are going to be more honest in their government, that they're going to tell people what they're doing when things are going wrong, and all that stuff. So they're going to be more open, more transparent with people. Sounds like a good thing. Perestroika, restructuring. Basically, it's the idea that people get the freedom of speech, that they're able to do what they want, more or less. They can say what they want about the government or whoever. Newspapers can print whatever articles that they want, and everything's going to be fine. An example of this not happening, before Mikhail Gorbachev took power, I think it was like in the 70s, a nuclear reactor in the city of Chernobyl in the country called Ukraine, the Soviet Union. Anyway, a city called Chernobyl had a nuclear reactor there, a nuclear power factory. The reactor melted, just blew up, and radiation spilled everywhere. They had to evacuate the entire city. If you've played Call of Duty, you remember that mission where you have to like shoot the guy and shoot his arm off. That happened in Chernobyl with the abandoned amusement park and all that. It was actually set to open like later that week, but it's never been used ever. Anyway, that's Chernobyl. The government denied it ever happened. People were suffering from radiation fallout, radiation sickness, and they said no, didn't happen. We didn't. There was nothing that happened there. Just anyway, complete denial. Gorbachev wants to fix that. He thinks that that's not a good way to govern a nation, and that all that does is lead to more distrust in the government. And he wants the people of the Soviet Union to trust the government. Anyway, with more transparency, people started seeing what the Soviet Union was actually doing, right? How they were operating. And with this whole idea of restructuring and giving people freedoms and giving them the ability to vote and to have freedom of speech and newspapers to say what they want, people realized that they could get more, and they wanted more. And so people started protesting, demanding more freedoms. Newspapers were even more critical of the government, and all of this just led each time he gave more freedom, the people demanded more freedom, right? You ever heard that thing that you give an inch, they'll take a mile? That's what happened. Ultimately, all of this leads to massive reverberations, ripple effects throughout the entire Soviet Union that causes major disruptions for everyone. And in the next video that I'm going to do, we're going to talk about which parts of the Soviet Union fell away and how ultimately all of this led to Gorbachev having to resign. But we'll get there. See you guys later. Go ahead, take the little short quiz that I've got, read over the notes, and you should have everything you need there. Take the quiz,